You are now listening to the Purple Fox Podcast.
The whole idea is for everyone to feel seen and heard. That's an important component of it, because unless you're feeling seen and heard, you're not going to actually share what's in your heart. You're not going to share vulnerably unless you're feeling that sort of attention on you. So that was important. And so I thought, well, I'll have one person share a story, and then we'll have others reflect back to them what in their own life it brought up.
What's going on, everybody? This is Kevin C. Eze, your host of the Purple Fox Podcast. Today I have in the foxhole with me Jack Cohen, my friend. He's here to discuss his new program, the Witness Circle. For those of you who don't know, I actually took the Witness Circle, and I got a lot out of it. It was a very heartfelt program, and to start this interview off, I want to read to you an excerpt that he wrote to kind of give people a flavor of what this course was going to be, this program. So why the Witness Circle? Given we can see each other as distinct human beings, there is a misperception that we are separate in every other way. Our interdependence demonstrates we are all part of a single organism. So by extension, the way we treat one another is the way we treat ourselves, and vice versa. That we would harm one another is a symptom of our disconnection from source. At the same time, we are separate. We each have our own form, and we each took a specific road to get to this moment in time. Things have occurred that are unique to us, and at the same time, if we choose to, we can see the similarities of our stories, which will have the effect of bringing us closer to one another. And I think in a time where there is so much divisiveness and so much fear of one another, any practice, any tool that can bridge the space between us is useful. So how are you, Jack? How you doing?
I'm good, Kevin. I'm good. That was pretty good, isn't it?
Yeah.
I like the way that sounded.
I wonder who wrote that.
I wonder where that came from.
So my first question to you is, what inspired the Witness Circle?
That's a great question. What inspired it originally was my experience interviewing people a long time ago for a documentary I was working on. And I was interviewing people that weren't necessarily going to make it into the documentary, because I was looking for people that were doing interesting things in the spiritual realms to show how we're all connected to one another. And I wanted to illustrate that. And it was all video, talking heads. But a lot of the interviews that I did were with people that weren't intended to be in the documentary, but they were telling their stories because they wanted to tell their stories. And I was an interested listener, and because of that, they were able to go places that they wouldn't ordinarily be able to go to. When you're just sharing something with a friend or with a family member, where people are looking to fix something, or they're ready to tell you how it relates to them, or their focus is not so much on you necessarily as what's coming up for them. So I thought this is an interesting thing, because I watched people go through a process of discovering things about themselves as they were telling me their stories. I thought that is a really cool thing. And for the longest time, I had thought about it, and it was in the back of my mind, but literally decades passed. And then I started coaching people one-on-one, and it's just sort of grew out of my wanting to do something that could reach several people at once without them having to commit to a 6-month container or a 1-year container, that would be effective, that would reach more people, and that would be fun. And sharing stories and hearing other people's stories and reflecting in a group, like actually having a playing field where you can practice looking at each other as a part of one another as opposed to separate, or honoring that our separation while at the same time like looking at our similarities. I thought that would be a really cool thing to do. And so that's what it came out of.
So like I mentioned in the beginning of the interview, I actually took this program myself, and I can talk about my experience, which was um, there were a lot of things that I noticed in telling my stories where I hadn't fully um, seen, like you don't see certain things about your story until they're reflected back to you. And that is it's so powerful to have that happen because everyone has blind spots. Um, and when those blind spots are reflected back to you, you learn more about yourself than you did before you shared the story. Um, so how did the format come to you? So like what when you were thinking about the structure of this thing, like what was that process like for you?
Um, it was really pretty simple. I mean, I think the important thing about what you said about having it reflected back to you is that there's a way of listening, there's a way of hearing. It's why the piece about you're listening to yourself talking to you is so important. Because if you regard it that way, if you're coming from that place, it keeps you really focused on that other person. And when you share your experience or what it brings up for you, you're owning your own part of that because it is you. And so it's kind of like it's this really sort of tricky paradoxical thing where we're part of one another and we're completely separate from one another at the same time. And you're hearing your story spoken through other people, and what you're hearing is actually your own story at the same time.
Right.
So I think those it's important to hold those things at the same time. I think. Um, but when I was to answer your question, when I was coming up with a format, I thought, well, the whole idea is for everyone to feel seen and heard. That's an important component of it because unless you're feeling seen and heard, you're not going to actually share what's in your heart. You're not going to share vulnerably unless you're feeling that sort of attention on you. So that was important. And so I thought, well, I'll have one person share a story, and then we'll have others reflect back to them what in their own life it brought up. It's not even necessarily reflecting back to that person. I mean, it's sort of like the formats sort of went through a transition. You may have noticed during the course, because at one point I had people actually asking questions, sort of like a hot seat, asking curious questions to bring more of that person out, and then getting to the point where we go around and say that reminds me of this, and so you hear other people's stories, so that while your story is being honored and you're feeling seen and heard, you're also understanding that underneath all of our stories is the same story.
Right. It did to me seem as if the format wasn't itself fixed. Like it would evolve over time, and then there was more leeway for us to ask different things, and then but then there was still you could still fill the container around it. And
Yeah.
so that was an interesting because we never knew what to expect, and it was always in a way we would always be thrown off of any possibility of being in our comfort zone while we were part of that. So that was cool.
Yeah, right. Yeah, and the people who were in it were the ones that were pretty much directing how it was going to go, depending on your story. Because, some of the stories were fucking brutal. Some of them were really like they were really heartbreaking, and other stories were funny. I mean, when we told our drug stories, Jesus, that was a riot.
Yeah, it was definitely a roller coaster for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And so I think it's important to leave space for that and not get too structured while maintaining a structure. So that's a nice balance to be able to hold. And I think we held it pretty well.
So when you're able to do this type of work, what what's the reward for you? Like what does it make you feel to do this type of work?
Uh, well, that's like, why do I do this? Why am I inspired to do this? I mean, the most vulnerable thing I can share about that is basically this is me giving other people what I didn't have. I had an experience growing up where I swear I could have set myself on fire in the middle of a room and nobody would have noticed. And, the only way I got attention was to get into trouble. And I got into a lot of trouble. Um, and
We
so
we
I
have we
got,
have similar stories.
so yes, I mean, I got a lot of attention. Wasn't the sort of attention I had in mind, but
Right.
I got the attention. And I think, so much of that stays with us because we all have like these spots that we can't see, and we all have these reactionary things that we don't even think about that just feel quote unquote natural to us. And I think one of the ways we get free from those things that have this effect of holding us back from actually being more self-expressed or fully expressed is that we're ashamed, we're afraid that like somebody's going to find something out about us that, or at least my experience is, I was very kind of circumspect about anyone I shared with anything about myself
No,
because I
that
felt
that
like
that hits a very similar spot for sure. Yeah.
it's like why share yourself if you're just going to get knocked on the head for it? And that was my experience. So it was like once bitten, twice shy, only it was a repeated thing over time. And I found in talking to people that everyone's got shit with their family, everybody. And it's like it doesn't serve anybody to blame them because you're doing the best you can do, and perhaps they weren't the best people in the world, but everybody's doing what they think the best thing for them to do is in the moment if they're thinking about it. I I like to give people the benefit of the doubt, and it also helps to not be a victim to it because it's like when you're young, you're subject to all these things that you have no control over. And so it's easy to reflect back on those things as an adult and think, oh, I was a victim there. And while I think it's fair and it's reasonable and it's valuable to see yourself as having not had control over it, staying in that place isn't helpful for you, you know. And at the same time, um, sort of glossing over it without actually looking at it and acknowledging that you were a victim. In a sense, you certainly were a victim, and like owning that shit so that you can get past it and get through it and say, okay, well now I'm here. How do I move past that? And so that's why this feels so good to me, because it's taking all this shit that happened that is just fucking horrible, and making it into something that's healing for other people as well as myself.
Well, that's it's interesting. You kind of roll into my next question, which was somewhat in that same vein. Like, what was the spot you wanted to touch specifically with this program, and that kind of goes into that. Like, what did you want to draw out with this program, and that's kind of it seems you answered that with the last question, which was so that people can receive what they didn't have, like those stories that they couldn't tell. Those stories that the people who were originally in their life weren't available to hear, you know.
Mm,
And so here they can come to the witness circle and get that exquisite attention that
totally.
can really, reflect back those places that they need to heal. They want to be seen, they want to be expressed, you know.
Yeah.
And that was very much my experience as well.
Yeah.
um did you have anything else to say about that, or?
Yeah, no, I just to reiterate it, it's like this is the place to come to drop off those stories, to tell the stories you can't tell anywhere else, or you haven't felt comfortable enough to tell elsewhere. And the whole thing is to make it so that it's comfortable enough and accepting enough and loving enough and approving enough of everybody in that space for that to come out. Because when you set up the field, when you set up the resonance for it, people show up because people are hungry to tell their stories, and there are stories that have a life of their own. And I think there are stories in us that are dying to come out, independent of us, that need to come out so that we can, move our systems, move forward. So yeah, all of that.
Was there Was there anything in this current iteration of the program, meeting my cohort, where like something like you feel it could have gone better? Like there, so if you imagine like a tube and there's like pegs that have to go into this tube, was there anything that didn't just quite just thunk in there, like it didn't fit, like it something could have landed a lot smoother?
Um, you know, I don't really, I don't really think so. I think, um, you know, I ran a few practice circles, just like single one-offs, and the 6 week program that you did was different. It was, you know, when you have 6 weeks with the same people, it actually you're you're actually the people that are in the course are the ones that are creating the course. It's not me. I'm holding the space and I'm putting the attention and I'm sort of directing it a bit. But for the most part, I'm just creating that structure so that people can play within it and go wherever they need to go. And imagine moving forward, it will probably be a bit more structured. But I think the success of it is that people told the story that they wanted to tell, whatever
Right.
that story was,
Mhm.
and like, you know, there was never any pressure to say anything you didn't want to say. You didn't have to share a story, but everybody wanted to share a story because it was a safe space. And it's like these were the people that if you're going to share a story, these are the people you want to share it with. This is your family. It's like that tight.
Yeah, I very much appreciated that. I felt like the container was safe enough where there was nothing off the table, and based on the prompts that you would give us each week, like people weren't afraid to go there. That
Yeah.
was, I think that was the best part of it, because I heard things and I was like, wow, they really went there, you know, like they trusted us enough to share this thing and have it received and reflected back to them, you know, and a lot of them, like you said before, were very, very powerful, you know. um
Yeah. Yeah,
yeah.
that speaks to the quality of the people that were in it too, especially that, which is why um, we're interviewing people and we vet them pretty carefully. We don't just we just don't tell people about it, and if they say yes, great, you're in. We're like, is this person a right fit? Is this person going to be able to hold the space? And it's I mean it's fairly obvious whether they can or they can't. Um, but we're very aware of, you know, can you hold this space? Will you hold the space for other people as you would want it held for yourself? And people, when I talk about it, it's fairly clear if people get it or not. And I've not had any conversations where people are just completely have not gotten what it is. Um, and you know, people have to be a full yes to it. And yeah, I don't think it's like they used to say, you know, when acting, it's like a director, it's just like you hire the right actors, and that's the whole game. It's like
Very much so. Yeah.
you have the right people in
Casting.
there, and you don't have to concern yourself about handling this person or what am I going to do about this person or do I have to take care of this person there? So no, everybody's taking care of themselves and everybody's taking care of everybody else at the same time.
That feels good. um what surprised you about the program? What's something you didn't foresee, like like a happy accident? You were like, wow, this, I didn't expect that to come about, but it, you know.
I, 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 I had, I had the experience of, so I would offer people um, a short check-in between sessions so that they didn't feel dropped. And so whatever came up for them, if they needed to connect, they would be able to connect. It wasn't mandatory, but it was offered to them. And I had somebody show up and not show up at the same time, and they were just in they were just in they were in rough shape. Let's just leave it at that. And so we kind of went through this process, this person and I, where they showed up in a way that they needed to show up in that moment, and it wasn't pretty in a call. and and they got, first of all, they got that it was okay, you can do that. And um, they saw themselves, they were able to see what they were doing and clean up their act, and they did. And it was really something. It was really something to see, because there was a whole journey there, a whole process that this person went through, because things came up. I mean, shit comes up for people, and it's like there's trauma in there. We all have it. And things come up that people are looking at. All of a sudden, you've got this in your face that you're not used to having to look at, and you can't not look at it now. And so that can be challenging, which is why it's so important to just hold that container and let people know you can always check in. And it's small enough, so that people can do that, and that I can provide that. And we'll be working with someone else as well. And so there'll be two of us, and that feels good. Yeah, so I think, to answer your question, that was the most pronounced thing. And also it was interesting, because you hear different people are in different places, and they tell their stories from different places. And some
Right.
people still have a lot of emotion around their story, and others are like, they just tell their story. It's just like something that happened, and it's over. And it's like, no matter what spot you're in, it's fine. It's what it is. And so you can do that. You can be in that place of really being tender, and no one's going to try to convince you to feel better, about it. It's like, that's how you're feeling. That's totally valid. And, you know, now you get to decide where you want to go from there, without being hit over the head with a lecture, or with coaching, or, with anything in particular that would have you like, sorry that you shared, you know?
You're over here. You should be over here so this can feel better. Yeah, I do appreciate how much space you give people to just be where they're at. That was another piece of the program that was very important and vital, especially with people sharing such sensitive stories. Um, you gave them a lot of room to just land with it wherever or however it was coming out. It could be frantic, it could be very, calm, or just like, like they were able to go there because of the space you gave them. So that was very appreciated. Um, and then my last question, what where are you hoping this goes? Or if there's even a hope at all, like, or is this something that you're just like, do you just enjoy people, and you want to, have these experiences with them, or is there some like macro level expansion with this that you see in the future?
I'm not, I'm not sure. I would very much like to take this one step at a time. It would be great to have several of these a week. I think everybody should do this. I really think everybody should have the
I agree.
experience of doing this. And as many people as want to do it, I want to be able to accommodate them. At the same time, I don't want to make the groups bigger than, 4 people, maybe 6 people. I think that's a really good number, and I think it has people feel like they're getting their fair amount of time, and people can go through a process in 6 weeks when you have groups that small. So
I agree with that. I like that because, I mean, there is something to be said for like people getting hit with like bank shots from other people telling stories. And for those who don't know, bank shotting is like when you're in a program like this, and there isn't really enough time for everyone to get to their stories, but you find pieces of what you wanted to work out or you wanted to have revealed in someone else's share, so that you're like, oh yeah, that's similar to mine, and you can kind of work through it through there. But I think with yours, with a smaller number, i i I appreciated that everyone knew that they were going to have a chance to share their story.
yeah,
That there's something more powerful about that, I think.
yeah. Yeah, I think it's important that everybody be heard. And when you have a smaller number, it's like you can't really hide. And always in groups of people, there are people that are more introverted and there are people that are more extroverted, and the extroverted ones always talk, and the introverted ones tend to like lean back, lean out. And I want to create a safe enough container so that if the person who tends to lean out still chooses to lean out, they can do that, but they're not going to feel neglected. They're going to have that opportunity, and they'll be encouraged to share their story without being pushed harder than would serve them. Because it's really important about, that consent is always the driving force
Right.
behind any story that's told. If that makes sense. It
It
might not be
does.
the right word, but yeah.
It does. Um, well, Mr. Cohen, thank you for coming on to the Purple Fox podcast. And
Thank you for having me. Thank you for asking.
no problem, no problem. This work, this kind of work, I know I bring on a lot of people to discuss like policy issues and things of that nature. But I think this for me, like this kind of work is like the meat of what this whole impetus is, because it's like blending those two energies, is those two things, and this kind of work, this is kind of my foundation as well. For those who don't know, like this kind of these kind of coaching modalities where you reveal yourself and you find out really who you are underneath all of the stuff that you consider you've previously considered yourself. There are everyone's like an onion in a way, and there are places you need to be, or you want to be revealed. And I appreciate you and the work that you do, and along with just your friendship in general.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Kevin. It's always a pleasure to spend time with you.
No problem, man.
And if anybody wants to hear about the program or read about it, they can go to jackhuntercohen.net and click on the witness circle.
There you have it.
Set up an interview with either myself or Layla, and we will talk and see if it's a fit for them.
Highly, highly, highly recommended, people. Once again, Jack Cohen, thank you for coming on. This is Kevin C. Eze, your host of the Purple Fox podcast, signing out.